than 35 years in international development and humanitarian assistance. So throughout the world, throughout East and West Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, the Balkans, etc. So in the past 12 years, I've been one of the Humentum, formerly Inside NGO, trainers on all things compliance and how to achieve with USAID. So that's just a little bit of my background. 35 years is a long time. I've been in a lot of different positions: country director, chief of party, director of admin and finance, chief of logistics, all kinds of different things. So I'm really happy to be here with you today. So thank you so much for being here. As she said, and as we said in the beginning, make sure that you can ask questions in the chat. I can see the chat. All of you are saying now it's fine, and you are helping us figure out that I was muted. So thank you. So this is basically a conversation with all of us on the call. We're going to have, it's like, I hope you have a cup of coffee. We're just going to chat together, go through some essential points, but basically this is your time in this webinar to ask questions that you may have on what it means to get ready for USAID funding and stay ready for USAID funding, and also to learn more about how Humentum can help you through that. So recently, many of you may have heard that 2 CFR 200, which are the uniform requirements for the US government regulations for grants and cooperative agreements, have gone through some significant revisions. So it's really important to understand the intention of the revisions, and then I'll give some highlights about some of those revisions. But basically, the intention was the US government wanted to make sure that everything was written in plain English. Just use normal day-to-day English to explain the expectations of the US government when your organization receives US government funding, whether that be USAID or the State Department or CDC or the United States Department of Agriculture. What they also made very clear within the new regulations is clearly what applies to all recipients and all sub-recipients. So they're much more inclusive about exactly which regulations apply to which type of organization. A key component, what they meant also by inclusiveness, was to simplify the notice of funding opportunity. And I will give some examples of that. And then allowing, for example, they're going to translate the notice of funding opportunities most likely into different languages. If you're working in a Francophone country, chances are USAID's NOFOs, the notice of funding opportunity, will now come out not only in English, but also French, which would be such a relief to the French speakers. Same with Spanish speakers. If you're in a Spanish-speaking country, then most likely the NOFOs will come out in Spanish and Arabic and hopefully Portuguese. It's going to be a process, but at least now the opportunity is that things can be written in different languages, and hopefully also you can respond in your French, Spanish, Arabic, etc. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. I am in a remote location, and so some of you can feel my pain of how internet works throughout the world. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So hopefully, it would be helpful if nobody is on video. I think that would help a lot better. Then it won't pull so much on the internet. So I was talking about the revisions, so I'm going to go without video, and I would appreciate if others would not have their video, and then we won't extrapolate so much of the internet. So the intentions of 2 CFR 200 is to be more inclusive. So they've simplified the NOFO process. They most likely are now going to give 60 days to respond instead of the tight 30 days. They're also going to be able to translate it into different languages, and hopefully you can respond also in different languages. And their expectations and the applicability has become much clearer, exactly what applies to a direct recipient, what applies to a sub-recipient. And of course, clarifying the expectations and the applicability does interlink with the USAID's localization priorities, as you can imagine. The more that it's easier to access US government funding, the more applicants that we will have. So here are some of the examples of the rules and regs changing. It will explicitly, as stated, cite which rules apply to recipients and subrecipients. The NOFO will most likely allow for 60 days to respond, and the notice of funding opportunities, which are known as NOFOs, will be in plain English. And the US government also is trying to limit so that NOFOs aren't 200, 300, 150 pages long. They're trying to get them to be very judicial and very brief in their explanations, clear and brief, and allow people time to respond. It also makes it very clear which regulations apply to fixed amount awards. There was often confusion about which rules apply to fixed amount awards. And so that becomes more clear in the new regulations. So, in addition, some of the main changes, some of you might be really curious about the main changes. The definition section has been revised, and there have been certain added definitions, one in particular that I will talk about. The thresholds for equipment and supplies has significantly changed. They've emphasized, again, simplified procedures for performing procurement, and I will give an example. They've also reduced the amount of prior approvals that they demand. And they've increased the expectation when it comes to your organization's internal controls. And remember, internal controls are simply policies and procedures, methodologies that an organization has in place to prevent mistakes or to detect, to find out that there's a mistake, or to mitigate, to resolve mistakes, because we're all human. You're going to make mistakes, and the US government understands that you're going to make mistakes. However, by having appropriate internal controls, policies and procedures, templates, checklists, you have your own ways of verifying, you have bank reconciliations, you have measures in place to prevent mistakes and also to identify mistakes. And then you have ways in which those mistakes can be resolved. And all of that together makes up your internal control framework. And the US government re-emphasizes the importance of mitigating and preventing problems. So I talked about the definitions because there were definitions, added definitions, and one of the added definitions that's very important for all of us that do international work around the globe is the definition of participant support costs and the new definition of participants. So the definition of participant support costs has not really changed. Direct costs that support a participant. That was always the definition. Things that you purchase on behalf of a participant, and it was often closely linked with conferences and training and travel. The happy moment is participant support costs used to require prior approval. They no longer require prior approval. But in addition, they luckily and fortunately added a definition of participant. And participant are direct costs for an individual or a group of individuals participating in or attending your program activities for a USAID or US government project. So now the government makes it super clear that what you spend for an individual or a large group of individuals that are attending and participating in your activities is a participant support cost. Okay. And in addition, participant support costs do not require prior approval. There's a happy moment. And now they give more context to who is a participant. The other happy moment is the equipment threshold has moved from $5,000 up to $10,000 per unit cost or more for prior approval. So the equipment threshold is now $10,000 or more for prior approval. So that's a really good question. Somebody asked the question, can we charge the indirect cost rate on the participant support cost? If you're talking about the de minimis rate, then no, participant support costs will still be excluded from the de minimis rate. But the de minimis rate is now allowed to be up to 15%, but it still has all the same exclusions. The NOFOs, the expectation is when a notice of funding opportunity is released, that they will allow a 60-day, you'll submit within 60 days instead of the typical 30 to 45 days historically. And that's what we're hoping to see. And that's the expectation that came with the revisions. Is that helpful? Okay. So there's another question. I don't really understand the implications of a definition of participant and what the difference makes. So earlier, before in 2 CFR 200, before the revisions came, participant support costs were restricted to things related to conferences and training. And so that's what made up a participant support cost. But now participant support cost is any type of expense that you would be spending on a particular participant attending an activity of your award. It does sound very similar to a definition of beneficiary, but there is no definition of beneficiary in 2 CFR 200. So now they've broadened the definition of participant support cost to include any type of cost provided to a participant in a particular activity. It can be very similar to anything that you purchase on behalf of a beneficiary. The US government is choosing not to use the word beneficiary. Yeah. So the reason often for excluding participant support cost in the de minimis rate is because technically often your participant support cost is a per diem. It's a per diem, or you provided them the money and they bought the transportation, or they paid for the transportation and you're reimbursing them the transportation. So that means they did the labor and the effort of the purchasing and not really your organization, because you're just reimbursing somebody as opposed to doing the full procurement process. So they find That's why. Okay.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll wait for Shannon to rejoin.
Hello, everyone, again. So sorry. It's definitely is not my day for internet. But it was a good transition because we're transitioning after answering many of your questions. We are transitioning to how to be successful when you're pursuing USAID funding and when you have USAID funding. So when you're pursuing USAID funding, the number one success is that your priorities and USAID priorities align. And the best resource to use is that the best resource to use for knowing USAID priorities are their country development cooperation strategy document. Every NOFO that you are pursuing under USAID comes from a CDCS, a country development cooperation strategy document, which is very important. So when you're seeking US government money, you want to be very fluent in their CDCS, which is very important. And then you also need to understand the USAID submission process. The notice of funding opportunity has several stages. And even before a notice of funding opportunity is released, you have to do the research. You have to anticipate the opportunities that are going to come forward with USAID. And there are many tools that can help you with that. USAID has this new website that's been a couple of years, 3-4 years old, and now it's really robust and has a lot of tools. It's called workwithusaid.gov. And then Humentum has many training services and consulting services, but you really need to become fluent in the researching before a notice of funding opportunity, before a NOFO is released, and then mastering and really being efficient in that 60-day response period. And then, of course, you will be successful if your organization has sound business practices through operational systems. So there are a few questions that you asked and then my internet went out. So does this also mean that prior approval is not required to transfer funds budgeted for participant support costs to another expense category? Sadly, no, that still is a prior approval requirement. If you have cost savings in participant support cost and want to move those costs to a different category, that would require prior approval. The participant support cost can either be given directly to the participant or the organization can manage all of the procurement on behalf of the participant. It depends on your organization. Okay. So there's another question about the de minimis rate. Is there a revised formula for calculating MTDC under the de minimis rate based on the recent changes that can be shared? It would be the exact same calculation. The exclusions have remained the same of the MTDC, except instead of excluding 25,000, the first 25,000, instead of charging the 25,000 of subawards, they allow you to charge 50,000 on sub-recipients. And I believe many of you might have missed the whole indirect coffee we had meeting webinar that we had a few weeks ago. So for the indirect rate of the de minimis rate that's up to 15%, all of the exclusions are the same: participant support costs, rent, equipment, etc., except you now are allowed to charge $50,000 of each sub-recipient. Okay? And I would encourage you to take Humentum's rules and reg course to go through all of the changes of the rules and regs. The participant support costs can be directly given to the participant, or the organization can manage the implementation of its participant support costs. It's up to you. Okay, we will see you in the new rules and regs course. So the new regulations only apply to organizations that have had their award amended. So if you currently are at the 10% de minimis on your current awards, then you would remain on the 10% de minimis unless USAID amends your award to the new rules. So operational systems, when you are pursuing and once you have US government funding, there's a common myth that USAID requires lengthy and complex or complicated policies and procedures. And actually, they expect the opposite. USAID wants organizations to create user-friendly policies and procedures that are accessible to all and are time and cost efficient. For example, the regulations, and this is not new, this has been this way for many years, the simplified acquisition procedures, meaning simple procurement procedures, are expected for procurements between $0 all the way up to $250,000. The US government does not expect heavy, lengthy procurement procedures from 0 up to 250,000. They expect simple procurement procedures. And what does simple mean? It means you do an internet research. You get in the car locally and you run around the market and you look at things and you write down the prices from different vendors or suppliers. You can call people for quotations. You can look on the internet. You can send out emails and collect quotes, but you just say, hey, I need a consultant for this type of work. What is your daily rate or your hourly rate? It doesn't have to be a formal, advertised process. Okay. So the new rate or the new regulations only apply if you have a new award as of October 1, or you have requested from USAID to amend your award. Okay. So now there's another question about the indirect cost rate. It's not 25,000 per year. It's up to $50,000 per legal agreement. It's not something you charge yearly on the de minimis rate. Okay. So we are US-based prime with local subs that utilize the de minimis rate. We will have to request USAID to modify our award to be able to flow down the new allowance for up to 15% de minimis. No, if you would like to amend your subrecipients to the new awards, to the new regulations, you have that authority. Because remember, your legal agreement between you and the sub is your legal agreement. If you would like to amend your subawards to the new regulations, you have that ability as of October 1. You might want to inform USAID, but they don't need to approve that. There is no maximum amount that you have to give to a local partner. There is no maximum amount unless you're using fixed amount awards. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. So if you've never taken Humentum's USAID rules and regs course, all of these questions, and then you will be very fluent in the rules and regs after taking that course. So I was talking about simplified procurement procedures. So simplified procurement procedures are from 0 up to 250,000. Formal procurement procedures are above $250,000, and those have to be advertised publicly. And those are usually called a request for proposals, where you're sending out publicly advertised, and you also might be sending it out via email. You're letting people know very publicly through advertising that you have a request for proposals and you have a certain length of time that you would like people to respond to your specific vendor technical needs, because you're seeking certain supplier and vendor services. But simplified acquisition thresholds, where basically you need to compete things, but the competition can be simplified. You do the internet search, you send out emails, you make phone calls, you get in the car and you go through the local market and you mark down, or you walk into the vendors and say, I need your pricing on the following in the next 24 hours. It needs to be cost efficient and time efficient, simplified acquisition procedures. So let's talk about subaward management, because many of you are talking already about subaward management. So basically, if you want to be successful in subaward management, the first thing to do with your subrecipients before you've signed a legal agreement, before you've entered a proposal process with them, is to perform a risk assessment. You need to provide a risk assessment with your potential subrecipients to know what are they really good at, where are their weaknesses, where are their strengths, both operationally and programmatically. You want to be able to understand them as an organization. How reliable are they? What are their priorities? Is it the right fit? How much assistance do you need to provide them? How much capacity building do you need to build into the legal agreement, for example? So that's the risk assessment. And a risk assessment is typically performed before you enter a proposal process with a potential sub-recipient. And then, of course, you have your legal agreement, the terms and conditions that mitigate the weaknesses that you found in the risk assessment. Because one of the reasons we do the risk assessment is to get to know the organization, is to identify strengths and identify weaknesses, but also the risk assessment is the basis for drafting the legal agreement. And then, of course, the risk assessment will allow the prime recipient to design the capacity building that you need to do with your subrecipient, because this also is a key concept within localization. You can actually use your sub award and build in costs for capacity building your sub-recipients. All of that is very allowable. And then, of course, it is required by the regulations that you regularly monitor and evaluate your subrecipients, both programmatically, but also their operational and compliance performance must also be evaluated. Okay. So I still have questions, so here we go. It's a bit confusing, but in USAID August 8th memo, they wrote, additionally, recipients may only issue or amend subawards to include 2024 revisions if those revisions are already included in the prime award. If a prime award is amended to include revisions, then the recipient should also amend any existing subawards to incorporate the revisions. That was the August 8th memo because USAID launched the changes sooner than October 1st. You should possibly go back to USAID and ask, is this memo still valid? Because currently, as of October 1, all the official 2 CFR 200 has been revised. So you might want to go back to USAID. One, I do encourage everyone to get your current awards amended to the new regulations because it will make your life a lot easier. So a risk assessment measures the capacity of your subrecipient. A needs assessment, I mean, you might call your risk assessment a needs assessment, but a needs assessment might be only tailored to what you're looking at programmatically. A risk assessment looks at a subrecipient from all angles, from how they do their finances, their HR, their operations, their procurement, and it also tests their quality of technical performance. Okay. So our project is 5 years and we have already taken the MTDC for subrecipient for initial 25,000. Now the project is on its 3rd year. My question is, can we charge again this subrecipient up to 15,000? No, because you possibly have not been amended to the new regulations. And if you've already recuperated the maximum that you can recuperate, that is the maximum that you can recuperate. In order to use the new regulations as a prime recipient, you must have your award be amended to the new regulations. And then the question is the August 8th memo of USAID introducing earlier the new regulations still valid? We will have to get back to you on that. Please example for subrecipient from a project in reality and what the difference is. Not quite sure what you mean by that question, Sam Ellie. So a subrecipient, please examine. So you have a direct recipient from USAID. The prime recipient is the entity that has received the money directly from USAID. Now the prime recipient is going to assign to a subrecipient a part of the programmatic technical areas. And then they're going to grant them a certain amount of money. Let's say 300,000, 400, 500. It depends on your award. And so again, if you're the prime recipient and you are going to delegate a part of your technical project to a third party, that third party is known as a sub-recipient. So I hope that answers your question. The risk assessment is one of the tools to choose your sub-recipients. It's not the only tool. You should look at, because some of your sub-recipients are going to be high risk, and that is fine. It is fine for subs to be high risk. It's how do you mitigate that? Okay. 2 CFR 200 applies to all U.S. government funding, not just USAID. For any organization that has an existing award before October 1, the changes of the regulations do not automatically apply to any federal award until your award is amended. Okay? If your subrecipient has a NICRA, you must accept the subrecipient's NICRA, or the subrecipient has many choices to use for indirect costs. If your award has not been amended to the new regulations, you are not allowed to apply the new regulations to your award. Okay? So, in order to also be compliant in general, if an organization is proficient in these 3 areas, life will be good. Number 1 is your own organization's policies and procedures are documented, are well known by staff. You've empowered staff to do the right thing. You've trained staff on your own policies and procedures, and you have verified that your policies and procedures are already compliant to CFR 200, to the US government expectations. That's the number 1 priority. Number 2 is you understand 2 CFR 200, but especially you understand the prior approval regulations, which are found in 2 CFR 200.308, paragraphs F through I, and that you understand the US government's cost principles, because the cost principles tell you which types of expenses are allowable, unallowable, and which ones need prior approval. And it also guides you on the treatment of certain costs. If an organization focuses first internally, are our policies and procedures compliant to the US government, to the USAID expectations, to CFR 200, your life will be easier, as long as you train and empower staff to know and practice your policies and procedures. Because the number 1 audit findings or problems within projects is that your staff don't know what to do. They haven't been formally trained. They haven't been empowered. They don't have access to the information that they need in order to implement the project correctly. They need to have access to the award. They need to be fluent in your policies and procedures, and they need the solid foundation of understanding the rules and the regs in 2 CFR 200. So, how can we help you? So Humentum has several different consulting packages that can help organizations. The first one is what we call a USAID readiness assessment. This is normally for organizations that are just starting out or that haven't begun getting US government or USAID funding yet. Okay? And so the USAID readiness assessment looks at an organization with them and discusses what are your policies and procedures, assesses your policies and procedures, looks at the structure of your organization, talks with the organization to understand what are their priorities, talks through them how they do business development to get an idea and a measure of how ready they are for US government funding or how far they have to go to be ready for US government funding. So you get a very detailed report that outlines all of your strengths and your weaknesses for the readiness for USAID funding. Okay. And then, so that's one of the first consultancy assignments. If you already have US government funding and you've already for quite a few years worked with US government financing and USAID funds, Humentum also has what they call the compliance examination. whether it's for grants or cooperative agreements, or Humentum can also do this for government contracting. So when it comes to the US government compliance examination, that's a deeper look at, that's an assessment of all of your core policies and procedures, if you would like that, or an organization says, we would like a compliance examination for this award. So within a compliance examination, it's a partnership with Humentum to decide what are the areas that you want to peel back on and really go through a thorough research on what is going well and where possibly your weaknesses are, both operationally and programmatically, and to see where you are or are not compliant. And then one of the third things that we offer is after you go through a compliance examination or a readiness assessment, and we've identified strengths and weaknesses with your input, and it's a very participatory process, both step 1 and 2. Step 3 is a consultant, a compliance expert consultant works with your organization to recraft and reshape your policies and procedures and offer tools and examples and problem solve for the weaknesses identified in a readiness assessment or a compliance examination. So I'm going to answer the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and then I'm going to see if there are any questions about these services. So the single audit threshold does not automatically change. Again, you would have to be amended to the new regulations in order for your audit threshold to change from 750,000 to 1 million. Has there been any conversations on translating to CFR 200? So your organization can translate to CFR 200 if you would like. Just remember that the English language meaning will be the controlled language. If there's any misinterpretation or mistranslation, the English interpretation will be the deciding factor of any type of problem or disagreement. So somebody has a question on fixed amount awards for prime recipients who are non-US based organizations. Does the FAA and the FAA Subawards contribute to the organization's audit threshold? Yes, they do. If you have a fixed amount award or a fixed amount subaward, what you spent in your fixed amount award and fixed amount subaward applies to your audit thresholds. The audit threshold was changed for everybody. There's no difference between non-US and US when it comes to audit. When it comes to audit, you all are following 2 CFR 200 subpart F is the audit for everyone, for all organizations, 2 CFR 200 subpart F. The audit threshold was moved up to $1 million now. However, again, you have to get your awards amended to the new threshold. The changes do affect public international organizations, and you would go to USAID's ADS on rules and regulations for public international organizations. For example, the equipment threshold now moves up to $10,000. The audit threshold is now $1 million, etc. So yes, and AID has already adjusted all of the changes in the ADS for public international organizations. The audit threshold for all organizations as of October 1 is $1 million as long as your awards have been modified to the new regulations. If not, you're still under the $750,000 threshold for all organizations if you're in the older regs. Okay. So the 3 points about being compliant. Number 1, you have policies and procedures in place that are compliant to the federal regulations and that you have trained your staff and empowered them to do the right thing. Number two is that you understand the prior approval requirements. And number three is that you're very fluent in the cost principles. And the fourth one would be that you read your award. Your award is your job description to implement your project. Without reading your award, it's like you're driving your car blind. Everybody who works on a project should have access and read their award. Okay. So USAID, CDC, and the State Department all follow the foundation of 2 CFR 200. And then USAID has added supplemental regulations. CDC has their own supplemental regulations. The Department of State has their own supplemental regulations. But all of the regulations of the US government for grants and cooperative agreements are founded on 2 CFR 200. I hope that's helpful. So is this a good example of the amendment of an award regarding the application of the new 2 CFR 200 provision? If the award is being issued or amended between August 7th, 2024 and September 30th, 2024, all parts of the 2024 revisions of 2 CFR 200 and 2 CFR 7 in effect on the date of this award or amendment, and all standard provisions attached to this agreement are applicable to the award. So that's explicitly stated in your award and was in the memo of USAID. So that means for awards issued or amended between August 7th and September 30th, because USAID had to put special procedures in place before October 1. But even when it clicks over now, October 1, any previous awards still have to be amended before you have awards that were built that are still going on since 2-3 years. You would need your award amended to the new regulations. Okay. The audit threshold is not project specific. The audit threshold is found in 2 CFR 200 subpart F. The previous audit threshold was $750,000. The current audit threshold as of October 1 is $1 million. If your award is amended to the new regs or your award started at this year on October 1. The reason that the US government excludes a significant amount of your sub-recipients is because your sub-recipients are spending the money and they will be audited on what they spent. Okay. The other types of services that Humentum offers, they have a lot of consultants that are very fluent in the pre-work before a NOFO, during the NOFO, and then post winning the award support. So the whole proposal development support process, how to do the research and anticipate the upcoming NOFOs, how to work through a NOFO during when a NOFO has been published, how to work through those 60 days, and then support negotiating with USAID should you need to. They also, Humentum has a lot of consultants and experts when it comes to selecting, monitoring, and evaluating how to make sure your sub-recipients are compliant, the structure for sub-recipients, the reporting structure financially and programmatically, how to have a sub-award management manual in place that makes it easy to choose and evaluate your sub-recipients. They have a few NICRA and indirect cost rate experts for NICRA recovery and general cost recovery when you have multiple different donors. So these are all services that Humentum has to offer. And then, of course, Humentum's giant portfolio of USAID focused training, USAID rules and regs, USAID subaward management, USAID proposal process, USAID a deep dive on procurement processes. All of these are through our webinar or online trainings. And in addition, I've walked you through 6 of their core consulting portfolio that make organizations more robust, more fluent, and compliant to what is expected when you have US government funding. Okay, I'm going to keep answering your questions. If we have an award that was signed prior to October 1, but has an effective start date of October 1, the new regulations should apply because your start date is October 1, 2024, and therefore you should be under the new regulations. Is there any physical training of Humentum? Physical training? Or it only conducts on a virtual basis? Oh, you mean in person. So the in-person training is for your organization. Your organization can ask for an in-person training, and then we come to your organization and you gather everyone and where we would train, and then the trainer is sent to you for in-person training. So yes. That's interesting. If your start date was October 1, you should be under the new regs. But remember, you can always ask for your awards to be amended to the new regulations. The threshold of 1 million is applicable as of October 1, and if the award document is amended. If not amended, it is the old threshold that applies. Okay? So was there any kind of training or meeting that USAID offered ahead of or just after this change? So there were several meetings that USAID did, and the changes were published for many months. So your headquarters is probably very aware of these trainings. But I don't know how much that flowed down to the country offices. So the Humentum trainings are not free of charge. USAID does not offer any free charge trainings either. Sometimes they have short webinars on some key topics that are free, but they do not have free trainings offered by USAID because USAID's, it's not their responsibility to train the regulations. It's their perspective is it's the organization's responsibility to understand the funding environment and to invest in the necessary skill set that's required in order to implement US government funding. So I'm going to answer Pacha or Paka's question. More specific to your earlier question, if you have a sub who gets 500,000 from you via USAID, and they also have 600,000 from CDC, they most likely meet the threshold if they have spent, it's $750,000 spent in the organization's fiscal year, or if they're in the new regulations, $1 million spent during their fiscal year means they reach the audit threshold. It's about how much you spent per year. It's not about the value of your one award. It's about how much money was spent during your fiscal year. So in 2020, the SPs for non-US NGOs said the recipient must have an annual audit consistent with 2 CFR 200 subpart F for any recipient fiscal year in which the recipient expends a combined total of $750,000 or more in federal awards, either directly or through another contractor or recipient, excluding fixed price contracts That's fixed price contracts, not fixed amount awards. That's government contracting. A fixed price contract is not a fixed amount award or a fixed amount subaward. I hope that answers your question. And also that section radically changed even after 2020. Okay. Not the US government's fiscal year. Your audit is based upon your fiscal year. Okay. So host government taxes are not allowed according to your agreement for your in-country expenses. If you travel internationally and you have to pay tax on a hotel, you're paying your tax and it's all allowable. You don't have to go through a refund process when you leave your cooperating country. You're welcome, Carol. If applies the audit threshold, the cost of the auditing process needs to be part of the approved budget. It depends on your organization. A lot of organizations, their audit costs are in their indirect cost pool, or they charge it directly. So Legia, it depends on your, and sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. It depends on how your organization pays for your audit costs. Is it part of your indirect costs or is it part of your direct costs? Okay. Okay, good. I hope that was clear. So on the last slide, we've given you, and you will get the PowerPoint presentation. We give you the email that you can email to ask all kinds of questions about the services. You can also visit the website where we explain in detail all of USAID consulting services that are offered by Humentum. And then, of course, please join our trainings. Many of you, my observation would be you really need to go to the rules and regs training so that we can talk about this with a lot more time and that you have the rule and the regs in front of you and you can see what the rules and regs say and how to apply them. Are there any other questions? Have we answered all the questions? I think we have. Sorry about the internet, everyone, but luckily it stayed for most of it. So James Kinsley, that's a really good question. And I think you should email client@humentum.org and they would be able to let you know about any discounts or scholarships when it comes to training. I sadly do not have that information. Thanks, Carol. Nice to see you, or at least read you. Okay. Have a great day, everybody. A great afternoon, a great evening. Hope to see you in Rules and Regs. Yes, I believe they will be sharing the recording and the PowerPoint. Thanks, everybody. Really good to see you. Good to have you. Sorry about my internet, but it seemed to have leveled out now. Sure, I would come to Kuwait. Oh, go wherever you want to send me. They will be sharing the recording and the PowerPoint. Yeah. Well, again, Sami Ali, please email client@humentum.org and you can request to have an in-house in Kuwait. I am one of the rules and regs trainers, so I'd be happy to come to Kuwait. I've been there before several times. So yeah, but my Arabic is very shwaya shwaya. I don't speak Arabic fluently. I do speak French fluently. Pour les gens qui parlent français, qui sont sûrs. Hey, okay. I think we can stop recording.